Russia is in real trouble. Economically, I see reports every day from lots of different sources, not from the Ukrainian government, but from other external sources that look at economic indicators. And I just don't think Russia can keep this going.
Hello and welcome to Frontline for Times Radio with me, Kate Chabot. And today we're catching up with senior retired American General, Lieutenant General Ben Hodges. Ben was Commander US Army Europe from 2014 to 2017, and he's a regular contributor to Frontline. Ben, good to see you again. Welcome back.
Well, thank you for the privilege, Kate.
So we're talking a night after Russia has yet again launched a massive attack on Kyiv, killing 8 people, including a child, according to President Zelensky, who declared that Russia has chosen ballistic missiles over peace talks. And he said, we expect a response from everyone in the world who has called for peace, but now more often stays silent rather than taking principled positions. It's a bleak situation, and it doesn't seem to be getting any closer to a ceasefire.
Well, not at all. The Russians clearly have no interest in actually getting to some sort of a sustained peace that's acceptable to everyone. And unfortunately, the Trump administration is doing nothing to actually help move that forward, and the Russians can see it. So every night, Russians are attacking and killing innocent Ukrainian citizens, and so at some point, everyone else is going to have to step up because the United States is not doing what it should.
Donald Trump has demonstrated time and again his unwillingness to put pressure on President Putin to end the war. What is the least bad outcome for Ukraine of those talks and in Alaska and Washington at the moment?
Well, the least bad outcome would be if at least the United States would not block things, whether we're talking about permission to shoot across the border against targets inside of Russia, or blocking other actions that would help put pressure on the Kremlin economically, for example. At least don't add to the problem. That would be the least bad outcome. And I think it's inexplicable to me. There's lots of speculation about why President Trump is so unwilling to actually put real pressure on Vladimir Putin, or even to say, hey, get your troops out of Ukraine. The approach of the Trump administration has been doomed from the very beginning because they either don't care or don't understand how, when this war started, the geography, what's at stake, or why Ukrainians are fighting. And so if you don't understand that, and as Vice President Vance made clear the other day, they don't care about why it started, he referred to that as nitpicky detail, then you're never going to get to an actual solution that's acceptable.
And when you say it's time for other members of the international community to step up, what if the terms of that failure involve Europe putting pressure, the failure to find a ceasefire, ends up Europe putting pressure on President Zelensky to cede land to Russia? When you take into account the comments that were made by the Latvian foreign minister, who said that Ukrainians might have to be reasonable and give at least de facto recognition of land, it does sound like the beginnings of a shift in the European position into a bad place for Ukraine. Is that a possibility? Do you think that might be happening?
Interestingly, the foreign minister of Latvia, Baba Brais, who is a terrific diplomat, her office immediately walked back that statement. They said it was misquoted or taken out of context. So I don't think this indicated the Latvians beginning to change their mind. Latvia will probably be at the very point of any future Russian attacks when Russia does decide to attack a NATO country. Look, let me say first, I was impressed with what the European leaders did who showed up at the White House almost 2 weeks ago now. They were not there to pay homage to President Trump. They were there to protect Zelensky because they knew that President Trump is not trustworthy. And so I was impressed with the level of solidarity there with President Zelensky. The fact that each of them talked about the need for a ceasefire, security guarantees, and then President Macron with the most important statement saying, look, we have to be involved too, because this is about Europe's security, not just Ukrainian security. So, of course, I live here in Frankfurt. You can feel a difference here in Germany I was just on holiday and I saw a Bundeswehr recruiting team at the holiday site. So this is a different time here.
I'm really heartened to hear your optimism on about the talks that took place in the European presence in Washington, because I was talking to a defence analyst, Professor Michael Clark, and he told me on BFBS SitRep, the radio programme last week, that the recent talks were really a process whereby each side knew they were going to fail, but they were setting the terms of that failure. Do you disagree with that?
No, that's actually a very good way to say it. And of course, I would almost always defer to Professor Clark, but I that's a good way to say it to make it clear. And I thought that was what came out of the visit of these European leaders. And um, the of course, at the end of the day, what matters is what actually happens, not so much what was said. But getting that out there, a public record, and that unity was impressive. Now, when we start talking about, okay, so what comes next? If we're talking about security guarantees, what does that mean? There is no such thing as NATO-like or NATO-style guarantees, which Mr. Witkoff is way out of his depth as the president's envoy to Russia. You're either in NATO or you're not. So, what does a security guarantee look like if European countries and Canada are going to contribute to something? Does that mean if Russia attacks Ukraine, that there will be an immediate return of fire or shot or this kind of thing? This is important clarity, getting the mission right. And I'm not talking about just militarily. It's also using all of the economic tools which we have thus far failed to use in terms of wrecking Russia's ability to export oil and gas, for example, or using frozen Russian assets. This should also be part of the leverage that we have.
And in terms of the military aspect of it, there's a report by the Financial Times this week which says it's talked to senior US officials who told European counterparts they provide these strategic enablers, things like intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance, command and control, air defense assets, even suggested the US may provide aircraft and logistics for a no-fly zone, but it said it would only happen if Europe sent tens of thousands of troops. That's never going to happen, is it?
I'm reluctant to say it'll never happen, but I would not count on the Trump administration following through on anything substantial in terms of intelligence or air support, even though it's in our interest. And I think for years we, the United States, are going to regret the failure to work more closely with our allies. This saying, hey, Europe, this is your problem, you need to solve it, is a terrible strategic move by us because it's in our interest that Europe is stable and secure. Our biggest trading partner is Europe as a bloc. And so it's in our strategic interest that that we have a secure and stable Europe, and we need allies. And so the more Europe becomes independent of depending on the U.S., the less ability we'll have to influence what happens in Europe. But I think this is what Europe is going to have to do. You're going to have to assume you're not going to have unlimited American intelligence. No way will the president approve U.S. Air Force, for example, flying over Ukraine because, and this will be something that your chief of defense staff will have to address if the Royal Air Force is going to be involved. And I hope they will be, just like I wish the U.S. Air Force would be involved. You have to assume that the Russians will challenge this. They're not just going to let NATO aircraft fly around over Ukrainian airspace. So you have to be prepared to conduct what Air Force calls SEAD, S-E-A-D, suppression of enemy air defense. So the first time a Russian radar locks onto a Royal Air Force or an American aircraft or a German or whatever, we have to have the authority to be able to shoot immediately to knock it out. We would not expose our pilots otherwise. And you also have to assume at some point one of these aircraft will be shot down. So that means you have to be prepared to go in and pick them up, even if they parachute into Russian-controlled territory. I'm 100% in favor of doing these things, but we need to think through so that we're not doing discovery learning after the incident.
So do you, I mean, the military planning of this and the discussions behind the scenes will always be going ahead to scope out the different scenarios that may be happening. But with the ceasefire at the moment seeming a long way off, or certainly not happening in any time soon, it does feel that, well, perhaps I'm guilty of this as well, but talking about this publicly brings an illusion that there is progress here, where actually we're stuck in this situation where Russia will not talk, it will not stop attacking Ukraine, and here we are, same position as we have been for some time now.
Yeah, you're exactly right. Unless something miraculous is happening behind the scenes, which is not to say that people are not working on this in different levels and different ways. I don't see any progress towards that myself. And the Russians can see that we are still disjointed, that the Americans are not going to provide the necessary inputs economically, militarily, politically, that would be required to make this work. So only when we realize that Russia only respects strength, they'll complain about it. They'll all sorts of whining about terrible things that we're doing, but that's what they would respect. And as long as they think that we won't actually do the collective, we won't do anything, then they feel no pressure to do something about it. On the other hand, I think that Russia is in real trouble economically. I see reports every day from lots of different sources, not from the Ukrainian government, but from other external sources that look at economic indicators. And I just don't think Russia can keep this going. So at least let's make sure that Ukraine is able to defend itself. A part of a security guarantee is also investing in Ukraine's defense industry, which is already increasing while at war. This is an area where we could do a lot to help.
Yeah, this is really interesting, isn't it? Because Ukraine appears to, until now, have had a sporadic but quite successful air campaign against Russia in Russia itself. Do you think that, you mentioned it earlier, that the Trump administration has withheld the use of ATACMS missiles when it reportedly barred these cross-border attacks to lure Putin into talks. Having said that, Ukraine is managing and hailing the new FP5 Flamingo cruise missile, which it says it's ready to produce en masse by perhaps the autumn. Can you just set this into context for us and tell us about the importance of this missile?
Well, the Ukrainians understand that Russia's ability to continue the war is tied directly to their ability to export oil and gas to China, India, Turkey, and other customers. And so part of this, of course, in UK, by the way, is sanctioned, I think, well over 100 of these Shadow Fleet vessels. So that's part of the effort to disrupt Russia's ability to export oil and gas. But Ukraine going after the refineries is an amazing improvement in their capability. I read earlier this morning or yesterday that Russia's capacity has been reduced by 17%. That's enormous. I mean, imagine any industry in UK that lost almost a fifth of its capability, what the impact would be. It's enormous. So Ukraine, unfortunately, they're doing it with weapons that they produce that cannot be stopped or disrupted by the U.S. or anybody else. ATACMS, of course, is a terrific weapon for precision against tactical targets, headquarters, logistics. And I think it's shameful that the administration is blocking that, and that they may also be blocking use of Storm Shadow because there's an American aspect to this. I think these are shameful policies by us. So the Ukrainians are not going to sit around and wait.
So when you take into account the production of this FP5 Flamingo cruise missile, a lot will depend on how quickly it can manufacture it and how soon it will be available en masse.
Yeah. So Russia, traditionally, its strength was its vastness. The fact that, invading nations or armies could come in, but they would just eventually be swallowed up by the vastness of Russia. That now seems to be a strategic weakness or vulnerability because they cannot possibly protect all of their infrastructure. For example, there's not enough air defense in the world to be able to do that. And so the ability now that Ukraine has developed to reach 1,000 kilometers, for example, into places where they can hit oil infrastructure is significant. The point that you're making is correct. It's the quantity. I mean, if you can only do this as like once a week, you hit one thing, that gets repaired. And of course, the Russians will eventually come up with ways to counter this capability. So getting the quantity as fast as possible to achieve the strategic effect, but also continuing to work on parallel things that would happen or that would help achieve the effect is a part of this as well. And this is where I think nations like UK, Germany, and Norway can contribute directly to that sort of acceleration.
It's quite a tricky situation at the moment when you look at some of the movements or posturing after the Alaska summit. The US is reported to have discussed several energy-related deals with Moscow this month, and it does look like the normalization of relations between Washington and Moscow are underway. What position does that leave Europe in? And what does it mean to Ukraine if relationships are starting to normalize between the two?
Well, of course, I was very, I can't say I was disappointed because I almost expect that the Trump administration is going to be doing things like this. Um, and I hope that the Congress will step in some way and prevent this. Unfortunately, most of the Congress, including the Republican leadership, still seems to be pro NATO, pro Ukraine, pro transatlantic, and they're not confused about who the bad guys are. So we'll see. Do they have the courage to stand up to the president? They haven't so far on most important issues, but I'm hoping that the Congress will play a role here. For Europe, unfortunately, I don't know what those implications are, except that it makes it even more important that Europe is willing to take the hard steps that apparently the Trump administration is not. And I hope when the president of the United States visits UK, I guess here in about 3 weeks or so, that he gets an earful from every British leader with whom he speaks, as well as British media and people out on the streets.
I'm curious to know the military perspective, certainly in the way that the Kremlin has been acting and successfully able to dictate not only the terms of any talks that have taken place, but also control and intimidate considerations to deploy even the smallest number of European troops to Western Ukraine. What do military figures make of it all? You'd expect a certain amount of frustration with their politicians.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, why do we give any countenance to what Russia says about who can come into Ukraine? They see that we hesitate just because they say, well, that's not even a possibility that NATO countries could send their troops to be part of a security force of some sort inside Ukraine. That's a sovereign decision for Ukraine and the rest of us, not for Russia. So we should be very publicly dismissive of that, as some people like President Stubb of Finland has. I think Prime Minister and others should routinely talk about this. It's not for Mr. Lavrov or President Putin to say. I would imagine that the Chief of the Defense Staff there and the British Ministry of Defense are working hard on pressing political leadership to define what do you want us to do. I think every commander will say, I can accomplish anything, just make sure I understand exactly what it is you want me to do.
And isn't that the problem, that there still doesn't seem to be a clear strategy of how to end the war?
Right. That's the hardest thing, frankly, is clearly defining the strategic outcome. Stopping the killing, that's not an end state, because if that's your end state, that doesn't address why are Russians still killing Ukrainians? Why did they invade? So there's got to be some end state that makes sure that Russia lives within its own borders. And that, again, economic tools, military tools, using the enormous advantages that we have. If you add together all of the economic and technological resources, capabilities, the militaries, the populations, the finances of the EU, plus UK, plus Norway, plus Canada, it dwarfs Russia. It's not even close. The key is, can you combine those capabilities?
I was talking to a former chief defence staff last week who said, a British one, who said that the Europeans have consistently shown a moral and strategic failure over Ukraine. Is that going too far?
I would not say that every country has done that. And of course, even I, as an American, know that Europe is not one entity. It's a collection of many different sovereign nations, obviously. Um, so I'm not prepared to say that Europe as a whole or that every European nation has shown moral failure. Certainly, some have absolutely done that. Others have absolutely not. But somewhere to achieve since Europe will pay a price as if it were a whole if Ukraine fails, in terms of millions more refugees from Ukraine coming into Europe, continued disruption of energy and food shipments, and the great potential of Russia invading a NATO country. It is in the interest of all of Europe to act together.
Ukraine has just marked its 34th Independence Day. It may well still be at war for the 35th, and the war has been described to me as this failure that I just spoke about. What can it do now to compel Putin to shift his position and bring the war to a close to stop the killing?
Well, I think the what the Ukrainians are doing against Russia's oil and gas infrastructure is really significant because that's the only thing that keeps Russia in this. Um, but also looking at the other countries that are supporting Russia. I mean, China, obviously, much more openly than maybe a year ago. Um, India is a massive amount of aid that gets to Ukraine, to Russia, actually bypasses sanctions by going through India. Um, Iran probably much less of a player now than they were even just a few months ago, but nonetheless, and then obviously North Korea. So how do we influence the support that Russia gets in this war? That would be one thing. I think that the Ukrainians, the leadership in Ukraine, and President Zelensky knows this, and the civilian leadership there in the Rada, they've got to make sure they earn and retain the confidence of Ukrainian people that there is a path, and that if their son or daughter or somebody from their family is going to join Ukrainian armed forces, that young person is not going to be sent into war until they are properly trained, properly equipped. So Ukraine, while fighting a war, is still in the process of developing what the Brits would call the institutional army, the part that generates the operational force. So training, education, equipping, that's an important part of this. It's not just about how many troops do you have out filling the trenches or how much ammunition you have. So the government needs people, and this war, you're right, is going to be. I think a year from now, hopefully, you'll let me come back on your program. It'll still be it'll still be going on unless something dramatic happens externally.
Ben Hodges, always good to talk to you. And yes, let's talk again. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much once again for the privilege.
You've been watching Frontline for Times Radio with me, Kate Chabot. If you'd like to be the first to get exclusive content, you can sign up for membership with the link below. You can also listen to Times Radio for the latest news or read it on thetimes.com.